Hello, and welcome to my first literary vlog. To give a quick background information on why I decided to do this, I have a bachelor's degree in English literature, but I've been out of school for quite some time. I don't want to say exactly how long, because you don't need to know how old I am. But it's been a good decade, and so I don't have the opportunity to talk about poetry and the classics like I used to when I was in school, and I miss that. Also, I think it's easy to get caught up in life and to be so busy that you kind of don't pay attention to the stuff that really makes your soul happy and keeps you going. And so I noticed lately I've been spending more time doing things that maybe aren't as important. And so I would like to get back to some of the things that I enjoy. So that's how I'm doing that, starting up this literary vlog. Today I want to focus on the Highwayman. Again, I do have a bachelor's degree in English literature, but I'm not a professional, I'm not an academic, so I'm coming at this mostly from the point of view of just somebody who likes to read. I do have a lot of friends who like to read, but not a lot of friends who like to read the classics. So I will go a little bit into technical aspects, but mostly it's just going to be how I feel about this in my own personal observations, not an academic way. So, The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. This poem was written in 1906 and it was published in Blackwood's magazine. It's a traditional style. It's a narrative poem. So a narrative poem is a type of poem that tells a story. There's a narrator in this poem, and there are also characters. So we have the highwayman, we have Bess, and we have Tim the ostler, we have soldiers. It tells a story with a beginning and an end, so that's kind of where we get the narrative poem title. To give a little bit of background information about when this poem was written, the early 1900s would have been an interesting time as far as literary times go, and that's because we're seeing the end of the 1800s, the beginning of a new era. The 1800s, particularly in poetry, there was a lot of structure and rules that went along with writing poetry. So you saw, metered verses, and you see stanzas. You see it's very, very structured. It's got rhyme schemes. Into the 1900s, into the modernist time, you're going to see a lot more free verse, which means that there isn't those same constraints. There is still some of that will go on, but it's a lot freer and just more natural way of speaking. Now, Alfred Noyes, he was a clinger on to the older ways, and you can tell that even by the subject matter that he's chosen for the Highwayman. If you think about it, in the 1900s, well, Highwayman's not going to be running around in the 1900s. That's something that would have, stopped 50, 100 years earlier. It's a type of a person or story that most people would have been familiar with, so they know what you were talking about, but it's a time of the past that he's discussing. Alfred Noyes didn't think much of modernists, so he famously said some pretty harsh things about some of the modern literary authors, particularly James Joyce. He didn't think much of Ulysses. But anyway, it's kind of interesting to think of things in that way. So another quick note about the Highwayman. In 1995, there was a poll that was done in England, and they ranked the most popular works of poetry, and this particular poem, The Highwayman, was found to be number 15. So it's definitely a poem that people are familiar with, and it's well beloved. Okay, I will go ahead and post a copy of the poem in the description. I'm going to just quickly read it here as well. And I'll also post some links to some of the websites and the materials that I've used to put together this vlog today, so that you have those ready and they're readily, easily available to you if you want to do more research on your own, or if you'd like to read the poem easily. Okay, so The Highwayman.
The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon, a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came, riding. The highwayman came, riding up to the old inn door. He'd a French cocked hat on his forehead, a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of the claret velvet, and breeches of brown doe skin. They fitted with never a wrinkle. His boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jewelled twinkle. His pistol butts a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle under the jewelled sky. Over the cobbles he clattered and clashed, in the dark inn yard he tapped with his whip at the shutters, but all was locked and barred. He whistled a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love-knot into her long black hair. And dark in the dark old inn-yard a stable-wicket creaked, where Tim the ostler listened. His face was white and peaked, his eyes were hollows of madness, his hair like mouldy hay. But he loved the landlord's daughter, the landlord's red-lipped daughter. Dumb as a dog he listened, and he heard the robber say, "One kiss, me bonny sweetheart, I'm after a prize tonight, but I'll be back with the yellow gold afore the morning light yet. If they press me sharply and harry me through the day, then look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." He stood upright in the stirrups. He scarce could reach her hand, but she loosed her hair in the casement. His face burnt like a brand as the black cascade of perfume came tumbling o'er his breast, and he kissed its waves in the moonlight. Oh, sweet black waves in the moonlight! Then he tugged at his rein in the moonlight and galloped away to the west. He did not come in the dawning. He did not come at noon. But out of the tawny sunset, before the rise of the moon, when the road was a gypsy's ribbon looping the purple moor, a redcoat troop came, marching. King George's men came marching up to the old inn door. They spoke no word to the landlord, they drank his ale instead, but they took his daughter and bound her to the foot of her narrow bed. Two of them knelt at her casement, with muskets at their side. There was death at every window, and hell at one dark window, for Bess could see through her casement the road that he would ride. They bound her up to attention with many a sniggering jest. They bound a musket beside her, with the muzzle beneath her breast. "Now keep good watch." And they kissed her. She heard the dead man say, "Look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." She twisted her hands behind her, but all the knots held good. She writhed her hands till her fingers were wet with sweat or blood. They stretched and strained in the darkness, and the hours crawled by like years, till now, on the stroke of midnight, cold on the stroke of midnight, the tip of one finger touched it. The trigger, at least, was hers. The tip of one finger touched it. She strove no more for the rest. Up she stood to attention, with the muzzle beneath her breast. She would not risk their hearing. She would not strive again, for the road lay bare in the moonlight, blank and bare in the moonlight, and the blood of her veins in the moonlight throbbed to her love's refrain. Tut-lut, tut-lut. Had they heard it? The horse-hooves ringing clear. Tut-lut, tut-lut, in the distance. Were they deaf that they did not hear? Down the ribbon of moonlight and over the brow of the hill the highwayman came, riding. The redcoats looked to their priming. She stood up straight and still. Tut-lut in the frosty silence, tut-lut in the echoing night. Nearer he came, and nearer. Her face was like a light. Her eyes grew wide for a moment. She drew one last deep breath. Then her finger moved in the moonlight, Her musket shattered the moonlight, shattered her breast in the moonlight, and warned him with her death. He turned, he spurred to the west. He did not know who stood bowed with her head o'er the musket, drenched in her own red blood. Not till the dawn he heard it, and his face grew grey to hear how Bess, the landlord's daughter, the landlord's black-eyed daughter, had watched for her love in the moonlight and died in the darkness there. Back he spurred like a madman, shouting a curse at the sky, with the white road smoking behind him, his rapier brandished high. Blood red were his spurs in the golden noon. Wine red was his velvet coat when they shot him down on the highway, down like a dog on the highway, and he lay in his blood on the highway with a bunch of lace at his throat. Ah, but still, of winter's night, they say, when the wind is in the trees and the moon is a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas, when the road is a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, a highwayman comes, riding, riding, riding. A highwayman comes, riding up to the old inn door. Over the cobbles he clatters and clangs in the dark inn-yard. He taps with his whip at the shutters, but all is locked and barred. He whistles a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair.
Okay, so I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the technical aspect of the poem, because I think it's very interesting and a really very complex way of putting words together onto a piece of paper. And I think with this particular poem, the way that it's been set up, it makes for a very mesmerizing story that's being told. So along with the vivid imagery and the rhythm and the rhyming of how things are set up here, it makes for a very enchanting and kind of weaving a tale of magic around you as you listen to what's happening in this story. So the lines of the poem are arranged into what are called stanzas. Stanzas like a paragraph. If you're looking at a book, you would see a grouping of words together, and then usually there's a space in between, or you might see an indentation to show the beginning of a paragraph. But in a poem, this is called a stanza. There are 6 lines in each stanza in the Highwayman. The rhyme scheme, so that is how the end of each line, the rhyming of it goes, is it's an AA, so the first and second lines will rhyme, and then the 4th and 5th lines will rhyme, and then the 3rd and the 6th lines will rhyme. So AA, B, C, C, B. And here I will put up the first stanza for you and show that rhyme scheme for you, the AA, B, C, C, B scheme. Okay, so the rhythm is really important in this poem. There's a rhythm, a kind of a driving rhythm of it, where you can hear the horses. Just the word choice helps with that too, but you can hear the highwayman riding down the road, like do, do, do. You can hear that trotting of the horse, and part of that is the way that it's been set up here by Noyes and the rhythm that he's included here. Now, like I said, there's 6 lines, so that's called a hexameter, but there's a foot of meter in a poem, which is a combination of stressed and unstressed syllables. Sorry, I'm trying to remember the word there. Okay, so again, I will put this up on the screen so that you can see it, but this particular poem, The Highwayman, has iambic, which is an unstressed vowel and a stressed vowel, So it's like delight, delight, if you can hear it. It also has anapest, which is unstressed, unstressed, and then a stressed. So such as unaware, unaware, unaware. So it's kind of interesting that both of those are used within the same poem. It's not always mixed like that. Okay, so that's some of the technical stuff out of the way. I think probably one of the things about this poem that initially drew me into it, I'll give a little bit of a background, personal background on it. When I was in the 5th or 6th grade is when I first heard this poem, and I think it was in school. We had a librarian who was a little eccentric. He was an elderly gentleman, and he read this poem to us as we were 5th or 6th graders. And even though some of the subject matter is maybe a little more mature for a 5th or 6th grader, there were things about this poem that just really drew me in. The vividness and the ghost story, kind of macabre setting and kind of spooky. It just really caught my attention, and I think I probably had a little bit of a romantic event probably at that point too, that's stuck with me all these years. So the story is kind of a Romeo and Juliet story. There's a lot of very dramatic elements, and so as a kid, it really caught my attention. And so I'm really glad that this poem came into my life at that point, because it's one of the poems, probably one of the things that started. It got my attention. And it's probably become the genesis of my love for poetry and for classic novels. This may have been one of those roots, was in that day as a 5th or 6th grader in the library. And the rest of the kids thought it was probably crazy. And I remember probably I think there was some laughing. I think some of the kids were laughing because the librarian that I was telling you about was very dramatic too in telling us the story. So I think some of the kids probably thought it was a little strange and hilarious that somebody was so passionate about a piece of poetry. But to me, I thought it was great. And so I'm really glad. Okay. So then there's a narrator to this poem, and I think of this person as almost kind of like a camp counselor. Like you've gone to summer camp, and there's the kid that's a couple of years older than you are, maybe the young adult that's kind of leading the camp activities, and you're all sitting around a campfire, and this is the story or a story similar to this is what you're going to tell around the campfire, right? It's going to be kind of ghostly and it's going to be about a nighttime experience, and it's going to have, there's going to be blood and death. Like, that's the story that you tell around a campfire, right? So that's kind of the vibe that we're getting from this particular poem. Now, some of the elements themselves, if we delve a little bit deeper into that, we think about, if we're talking about spooky elements, then we can pick out the fact that it's night. We can pick out the fact that it's out in the middle of the country. Like, this inn is not in the city. It's not in a town. It's out in the middle of nowhere on this road that's just empty. There's really not a lot going on out there. So you think about that, can be really spooky to be out in the middle of nowhere at night. So the road itself is spooky because they talk about it being this ribbon, a ribbon of moonlight. So it's like all that's out there is you and the moon and maybe the highwayman. I mean, it's dangerous. It's not a safe place. The moon itself, the moon is something that's, when you're talking about symbolism, it's a symbol of emotions. It's not a constant. Like, the moon changes each night. Sometimes it's a full moon, sometimes it's a sliver of a moon, sometimes you don't see it. Sometimes it's right, it's huge and right there. It's got a changeable nature. The tides run by it. It's emotional. There's a lot of mention of red in this poem too. So you have the dark, you have the moon, you have suddenly this vivid color red that's coming in at different points. And some of those they talk about the highwayman's coat being claret. So that's a type of red. And they talk about the red love knot. And they do talk about the blood. And so red is a symbol of blood, and also it can be a symbol of passion and love as well. So I think bringing in those moments of red in the poem is very symbolic in both senses. This is a love story, but it's also a violent story. There's death involved, and it's not the kind of death where you fall asleep and, ease peacefully into the next world. It's violent, traumatic type of death. Let me think of one of the other aspects of this poem that I like is the mention of the love knot in her hair. When I think of a knot, I think of binding something together, but also it's complicated. It's not, just a straight piece of rope. That's pretty simple. But if you have a knot, it's all tied up. It's, it can be a tangle. It can be a mess. And I think that's symbolic a little bit of this relationship here and the type of love that the highwayman and Bess share. It's messy. It creates problems. It's, not a typical relationship. It's tangled and intertwined. But then the binding of the two of them is what keeps them together afterwards. Like, so much so that we're talking about their spirits at the end of the poem. Perhaps centuries later, still having the love meeting, love tryst at this inn. That's the kind of love that they shared. Messy and crazy and tangled, but also long-lasting in a way that maybe a different type of relationship wouldn't be. Okay, so moving on a little bit, looking at my notes here. I do have a couple of questions that I'll ask and go into a little bit more here in a few minutes, but we can quickly talk about the historical facts about a highwayman and what exactly a highwayman is. In England, there was a type of robber, of course. Usually they would rob from horseback, and they would take from the coaches and things that were out in these solitary places. So they would stop the richer people and rob from them. And this started, would have been Elizabethan era until the early 1800s. And in other countries, this persisted for a couple, some more time even after it stopped in England. So particularly, if you talk about it in America, we would have had, coach robbers, road agents. I'm trying to think of another word that you call it, like in the Wild West, what you'd call it, but it's the same idea. In Australia, they called them bush rangers. But I think it's interesting in the highwayman, the fact that the highwayman doesn't have a name. If you think about it, Bess has a name, and even Tim the ostler who betrays them, they have names, but the highwayman doesn't have a name, and I think there could be a couple of different reasons for that. Probably primarily was the fact that if you're a highwayman, you don't want people to know what your real name is, because if they know who you are, then they're going to come, get you and take you away, and you're going to be executed. You shouldn't be stealing from people. And so you're not going to say, oh, Jim Smith, the Highwayman, because then you're not going to be in business anymore if you know the name. But I think another possible reason why he isn't named is because I feel like the real star of this poem and the real hero here is Bess. And the reason why I think that is because when you look at her motivations for what she does, I think it's a little, more honorable. And you can disagree with me in the comments if you'd like to do so. But when you think about it, she gives up her life for the highwayman's life, for her lover's life. And so that's I don't know what more brave or courageous thing a person could do than to lay down their life for another person, somebody that they love. The highwayman, he gives up his life too. He also perishes. But I feel like his motivations are a little more selfish. I feel like in turning back and going to have this fight with the soldiers, or this showdown with the soldiers, it's selfish in a way because it's not honoring what Bess did for him. Like, she did what she did to save his life and so that he would be able to get away. And I feel like the poem makes it clear that he did get away. He was warned away. He was not in the area anymore. And he purposefully turned back when he heard about what happened. And it was only then that he was in danger with these soldiers. And so I feel like he's not honoring the sacrifice that she made by turning around and having this confrontation with these soldiers. I mean, it adds to the drama, and you're not going to have a ghost story probably if he doesn't. And so I don't know that there's any other way that this story could go down. It's very Romeo and Juliet, but if we're talking about whose motivations are the most honorable in my mind, then I'm going to go with Bess. She's the hero to me. Let's see. Some of the other things that I've noticed when reading about this, it's very interesting to read the descriptions of these different characters. Bess is described as being, beautiful. She's got long, dark hair. You just, the way that she's described, she's got red lips, so she's probably, you get a little vixen of a sense, like a little sultry, sexy sense from Bess, but you get this idea of her being pretty. The highwayman is very debonair. Noyes takes care to describe what he's wearing even, and it's, velvet, and it's this French wine color, and it's very rich and vivid, and so you think of him as a charming, very beautiful person. And then you get Tim the ostler, who is described in the opposite of that. Noyes takes care to let you know, he's got this moldy, yucky hair. He's not, he looks mad. He's got this look of crazy in his eyes and stuff. And so very, quickly, without saying much at all about these people, you know who you're supposed to be rooting for and kind of who not so much. Okay, so some of the questions. And we touched on this a little bit. We talked about, do you think the choice Bess makes is silly or inspiring, or is love ever a good enough reason to give up your life? So if you're to answer that question, I would say that Bess is an interesting character. I would say the choice she makes, because she doesn't have any other choice than to either do something to warn him away or to do nothing and watch him die. So I would say it's an inspiring choice that she makes in that moment. I don't know that the choices that she's made in her life up to that point have been maybe the best choices that a person could make. I mean, she's aligned herself with the Highwayman, and so things are probably not good things are going to happen when you do that. And then there's also kind of a question in my mind of how entrenched in the Highwayman's activities is Bess. Is she an innocent, aside from the fact that she knows that he does this? Or is she helping him? Is it this the Bonnie and Clyde type of thing? Does she tell him about rich patrons of the inn who are traveling, the next day? Is there some kind of a business opportunity that they have going on with each other, in addition to the relationship? I don't know. Maybe not. There's not anything to suggest that in the poem itself, but she's aligned with, she does know that he is a highwayman, and so you're gonna expect some drama is gonna take place from that. Okay, so another question: have you ever admired a criminal? Do you think it's okay to make robbers into heroes? So in this poem, the highwayman is more the hero than the soldiers. You would definitely say that. The soldiers are portrayed as being, bully-some and not taking care with, actually they're brutal. They're not nice people at all. They mistreat Bess, even, they're doing some kind of even sexual type things, giving her a kiss that's unwanted, and, making sport of her when, they're in this terrible situation. She's in a horrible situation. But the highwayman, is what he's doing good? Well, no, not really. But there is a canon of stories where the heroes are sometimes criminals. Robin Hood comes to mind here. With this poem, we don't have any kind of indication that the highwayman is doing this for good reasons, for philosophical reasons, or for the benefit of anybody aside from himself. And in fact, even the way he's described with his rich clothing, I would assume that he's not doing it for the benefit of others, but we don't know. That's a question mark, maybe. Maybe he's helping somebody. And so does that make his robbing right? I don't know. You can maybe leave a comment if you want to. Okay, so if you were making a movie of the Highwayman, who would you cast as the Highwayman, and who would you cast as Bess? So I gave this a little bit of thought, and I thought that I would probably cast Megan Fox maybe as Bess, because she's got the long, dark black hair, and because I think she looks like perhaps what I think that Bess might look like. And then I thought for the Highwayman, I would cast Orlando Bloom, because he kind of, especially in like the Pirates of the Caribbean, it's kind of the same look that I would expect from a highwayman, and also he kind of has and can have an attitude of kind of being adventurous and doing stuff kind of crazy and not commonplace. Okay, and my last question: how do you feel about tragic stories, and would you switch the ending of this poem for a happy ending if you could? Okay, so for me, I do like tragic stories. That's not all I read. It's not all I like. I like a mix of happy and sad things. But I don't think that tragedy should be omitted from art. And in fact, I think that it can be the genesis of amazing works of literature and art. And it's when times are hard and when sorrow is upon you that, the desire to, make something that matters is, there. And what's a lot of times the seed of something amazing to grow. I think tragedy is needed too, because life is tragic sometimes, and there's no possible way that you can be a human being and only ever experience, happiness or comedy or some of those lighter things. It's part of being human that we experience sadness and sorrow in addition to those lighter, happier times. And so I feel that absolutely tragedy has a place in the arts and in literature and in poetry. And this particular poem just flat out wouldn't work if there was a happy ending. In a way, it does have a little bit of a happy ending if you think about the fact that the spirits of these two people are living on and are still together, are still able to interact with each other. They talk about these lonely, dark nights where the spirit of the highwayman rides up to the door of the inn, and who's there? Bess is there. So in a way, that's a little bit, there's some closure there. But there's no way that this poem would work if it was like, oh, and then the soldiers they were told to go away, like something else happened, and so they had to go away, and so everything was fine. Or, the highwayman was able to come and rescue Bess, and it's not the same story. It wouldn't be a ghost story. It wouldn't be the story at all if it was not tragic, if there was not the death that there is in it. Okay. I think that's about all for today. I know that was kind of a lot. I hope you enjoyed this, if anybody is watching ever. Like I said, I'm doing this a lot for my own self. I really enjoy reading poetry, thinking about poetry, doing research on poetry. I do plan to include and do some vlogs on classic novels as well, so it won't only be poetry. But I think it's important to keep a finger dipped in the pool of things that you like. And so for me, this is an important way of staying involved in literature. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, then leave me a comment. And that's all. Thank you. Bye.